everyone. Hope all of you are doing well. I'm going to present 4 points tonight as the introductory notes on Bach and his Chaconne. Hopefully, it will not be longer than 30 minutes. Yeah, just to keep it short and intact. The first point, I'll be talking about Bach and his musical inspiration. And the second point, I'll be talking about the brief history of the genre chaconne. And the third point, I will talk about the stature of Bach's six sonatas and partitas, including the chaconne in it. And the fourth point, I will be talking about the various uh, arrangements of Bach's chaconne up until 1987. Yeah. Okay, so let's go on with the first point. Let me share. Yeah, for those of you who's wondering why I'm talking about Bach and the musical inspiration, well, obviously I'm not going to talk about his biography because you can just find it in many sources. Yeah, but I would like to start with this topic because there are many interesting facts about Bach's stature that might be surprising to you. Yeah, as it was also surprising to me when I learned about Bach in a deeper way. For example, maybe today, I mean, if anyone asks you who is the greatest Baroque composer for you, I believe 95 or maybe more than 95% will answer Bach. Yeah, but are you sure about that? Yeah, because during his time, Bach was not known. Yeah, basically in Europe, he was just known in the local places in Germany, but not throughout Europe. Or another question: how did Bach get familiar with violin technique? Yeah, and violin composition, because we know that he is a great harpsichord player, but almost no clear record about him being a violin player actually. So that's what I'm going to discuss. Just to clarify, because the whole idea of the chaconne, the original chaconne, is actually for solo violin. So let's start with point number one. Bach was the last great representative of the Baroque era. Yeah, and we cannot exactly say when the Baroque started and when it ended. Yeah, so we just going to be talking about the rough dates. Yeah, about 1600 to 1750. However, he lived in an age which was already rejecting the Baroque aesthetic in a favor of a new, simpler, more sensitive, and enlightened one. So if we talk about Baroque composers, actually we refer to composers like Gesualdo, Monteverdi, Lully, Strozzi, Schütz, Handel, yeah, but not Bach, because when Bach was active about 1720, 1730, so many composers, so many young composers, and so many schools from different countries already started to compose something new, something more simple, something more sensitive that we called in music history as galant and Enfin Summer Steel. Yeah. Point B, Bach is today recognized as one of the greatest musicians in Western music history. However, during his lifetime, Bach's fame was largely confined to Germany, as I already mentioned in the beginning. Bach was known primarily from his occasional public appearances as an organ virtuoso. Familiarity with his vocal compositions was largely confined to the cities in which he performed them, and his instrumental music was for the most part known only to other professional musicians who had performed or studied with him. Bach never left Germany, yeah, unlike Handel, settling for a series of positions that involved the composition and performance of church music, with one exception when he was in the court of Cothen. This has led to a view of Bach as primarily a composer of sacred music. Yeah, jadi so many people think about him being a sacred music composer. However, like many other 18th century musicians, he was actually equally active in both sacred and secular works, along with vocal and instrumental works. Bach was as willing as his contemporaries to adopt the most up to date musical fashions from France and Italy. Where he differed from others was his strong interest in counterpoint and highly dissonant chromatic harmony. This is the tradition, the musical tradition that actually came from the late 17th century, from the late Renaissance, called musical mannerism, a term that designates a style of painting and sculpture that is characterized by the use of distortion, exaggeration, and unsettling juxtaposition for dramatic effect. The most remarkable aspect of Bach's music is its diversity, which eclipsed the music of his contemporaries, including Handel. Bach composed substantial examples in all the genre of his time, except opera and oratorio. However, operatic music can be represented by several dramatic secular cantatas anyway. So, in another word, Bach produced enormous number of works. Yeah, Bach music successfully blends elements of French and Italian with his own distinctive musical personality, even though he never left Germany. His music requires a degree of technical skill from the performer that is higher than in most of his contemporaries. Maybe this is one of the reasons why Bach's music was not known, yeah, was not oftenly played during his time. Bach opened up new dimensions in virtually every department, including the musical quality and technical demands, obviously the Chaconne, yeah, for solo violin. So what is the result of all this background is music of great complexity that challenges both performers and listeners, yet possesses enormous emotional depth. So just quick careers of Bach. He never left Germany, but he moved to several cities in Germany. So during the early years, he was a church organist at Arnstadt, composed mostly organ music and possibly several sacred vocal works. And then Mühlhausen and Weimar, when he wrote organ works and cantatas. Köthen, he focused on instrumental compositions and secular cantatas. So the Chaconne was written in Köthen. Bach was not required to write sacred vocal music in this place. However, he composed an unknown number of secular cantatas for such events as princely birthdays and weddings. And in Leipzig, he wrote church cantatas and other works. From 1741, his musical thought seems to have been turning toward encyclopedic collections that would demonstrate the arts of musical composition and performance in a comprehensive, systematic way. Yeah, we can obviously see these encyclopedic collections in Goldberg Variations, the Art of Fugue, Musical Offering, and the B minor Mass. So the catalog of Bach music, if you notice, the first attempt to make the comprehensive catalog of Bach music is actually in 1850, which is 100 years after his death, 1750. Yeah, by the German society called BG, Bach Gesellschaft. And then it's perfected not until another 100 years later, yeah, in 1950 by Wolfgang Schmiede, or what we know today as BWV, yeah, Bach Werke Verzeichnis. In contrast to Handel, Bach was largely forgotten as a composer in the decades after his death. Yeah, again, maybe in music history book, always the comparison is between Handel and Bach, or like Haydn and Mozart, for example. Yeah, but while Handel was famous, yeah, and he basically made a good living throughout his life, but Bach was largely forgotten as a composer. Very few of his works were published during his lifetime. The vocal music lay inactive for many years. The first attempt of Bach revival was by Johann Nicolaus Forkel in 1802 with the publication of the first biography of the composer. But the big breakthrough came in 1828 when Mendelssohn performed the St. Matthew Passion in Leipzig, which was a musical revelation for listeners and composers alike. Yeah, so basically that's point number one, and I hope this information will help you about understanding even better how Bach actually got all his inspiration, um, all the great music of Bach, although he never left Germany, yeah. But unfortunately, his music again, especially the vocal music, was forgotten. Yeah, but fortunately, the keyboard music, at least, it was practiced throughout ages, yeah, after Bach. So the second point is the brief history of the genre chaconne. So let's start with the definition. Yeah, chaconne or chacona or chiacona. So we start from the history of Western music. Yeah, it's a book written by Donald Grout, Paliska, and Peter Buchholder. Chaconne is a dance song in triple time, originating in Latin America. Music of ground-based pattern. And there's another form that is similar to chaconne, which is pasacaglia. Characteristics of both the chaconne and passacaglia in the 17th century is the continuous repetition of a four-bar formula in triple meter and slow tempo. In the 18th century, the two terms became confused. What Buxtehude called a chaconne, Bach called a passacaglia. And then the definition from Grove Dictionary: a chaconne is a Baroque dance and variation form. It originated again as a dance song in Latin America and was popular in Spain and Italy in the 17th century. It is a music in triple meter. Chaconnes occur frequently in the stage works of Lully and other French opera composers, as well as in German keyboard music of the late 17th and early 18th, by which time the distinction between chaconne and passacaglia again became blurred. The definition by Alexander Silbiger, American musicologist: before 1800, it's a dance, often performed at a quite brisk tempo that generally used variation techniques, although not necessarily ground-based variations. In 19th and 20th centuries music, it's a set of ground-based or ostinato variations, usually of a severe character. Most chaconnes are in triple meter. The term is sometimes used interchangeably with passacaglia. The society in Germany in Bach's time perceived the genre of the chaconne to be the dance of a grieving mourner. So if we look at all these definitions, at least some commonalities: the chaconne is triple time, it's a dance song, it's a variations on ground-based pattern, and it's confused with passacaglia. So that's the definition, and then let's look at the chronological history of chaconne. Again, as it already says by all those definitions, that it begins in Latin America, but unfortunately virtually unknown. Yeah, the word chaconne is lost in ancient history. So what we know is, at least from 16th century Spain, regardless how it was brought from Latin America to Europe during 17th century, the musical genre has survived in two versions. Number one, as an originally very joyful, even energetic Mexican dance that made its way to France by way of Italy and Spain, or as a mourner's dance known as Chaconne de España. It was a dance song associated with servants and or slaves. It was often condemned for its fiery and suggestive movements. It was said to have been invented by the devil. It was traditionally accompanied by guitars, tambourines, and castanets. The dance is closely related to the passacaglia. Chaconnes were performed at brisker tempo, while passacaglia slower. In Spain, the chaconne's popularity began to decline by around 1630s, but it maintained a presence as a popular dance and a folk dance. Another source, have attributed it to the name Chaconne, a successful Spanish admiral of the 17th century. And then entering 17th century, four forms of the chaconne emerged. In France, it became a court or state dance, where Lully was one of the first composers to arrange it as the finale of his scenic works. In England, Similar fashion was arranged by Purcell in The Fairy Queen. In Italy, composers wrote capriciously in the style of spontaneous improvisation. And in Germany, composers closely modeled on foreign works, including Bach's Chaconne D minor, a work in which it combines various international characters that may be traced. And then in the 18th century, Christoph Willibald Gluck in his operas used also chaconne as finale. With time, the chaconne became an instrumental work which gave composers a perfect opportunity to create dramatic development. Slow tempo, 3/4 meter, basso ostinato, and variation form comprised the characteristic for the instrumental chaconne. Three other dances were often related to the chaconne: Passacaglia, Folia, and Sarabande. The main difference between the Passacaglia, Folia, and Sarabande and Chaconne is that the first three typically have basso ostinato, which is not always true for the Chaconne. So we were expecting Chaconne having the rondo form ABAC-ADA in the 18th century again. These dances use 3/4 meter with the emphasis on the second beat. They are all written in variation form, which was useful for long chord dances. After 1740, the chaconne fell largely out of fashion in instrumental solo and chamber music, but maintained a place on the musical stage throughout the final decades of the century to a much greater extent than the Passacaglia. So Passacaglia even more disappear here. And then in the 19th and 20th century, composers returned to writing chaconnes and passacaglias by rediscovering pieces by the German masters, especially Bach's passacaglias for organ and his chaconne for solo violin. The defining feature is the ostinato bass with variation. Some writers attempted to define a distinction between the chaconne and passacaglia still, so the same issue, based primarily on the examples by Bach, but no consensus was ever reached, and for the most part, the term continued to be used interchangeably. The most common progression for the chaconne was 1-5-6-5. So that's my second point. The third point is about the stature of Bach's 6 sonatas and partitas, including the chaconne in it. So in the 18th century, violin repertoire was dominated by the Italian school, led by Corelli, Vivaldi, and Tartini. Bach was certainly influenced by the Italians, as reflected in his violin concertos. Yeah, you can hear in these three numbers, it's very Italian sound. Yeah, but Bach's music originality came from the German school, which is famed for polyphonic playing. The polyphonic style of playing the violin was well developed in Germany by the end of the 17th century. The German school of violin playing achieved the technique of making a single violin self-sufficient without an accompaniment by other instruments. Ya. Jadi itu betul-betul highlight of German violin playing. In the 18th century, even when the Italian school became dominant, this German polyphonic style not only continued in Germany, but also expanded its influence to France and even Italy itself. Bach kept this tradition alive by reaching the culmination with the creation of the solo works, including this chaconne. So 6 sonatas and partitas for violin solo BWV 1001 to 1006, composed during 1717 to 1723. The genre of unaccompanied violin solos, that's the keyword, unaccompanied violin solos, can be traced back to the later 17th century. Heinrich Bieber published his Passacaglia for unaccompanied violin solo. Johann Paul von Westhoff published the suite for unaccompanied violin. Thomas Baltzar composed 2 preludes and Allemande for unaccompanied solo violin. Bach would certainly have known some, if not all, of these works. At the end, Bach's solos far surpassed the rest of them in both technique and musical terms. The violin solos did not enjoy such a prominent status in Bach's own time, and even in the rest of the 18th century. Yeah. because they're expecting violin with another instrument, not solo, and moreover polyphonic solo violin. Yeah, that's completely out of their reach. Bach's ability on the violin was not well documented, but he was likely also a talented violinist who learned the violin from his father and his older brother. According to C.P.E. Bach, Johann Sebastian was a capable violinist. His status as a violinist was overshadowed by his own fame as an organist. So the six sonatas and partitas were composed from his period of service for Prince Leopold at Cothen. Bach's personal friendship with the prince granted him more freedom in writing music than he has been given in Weimar, the city before Cothen. As the court composer, Bach was accountable to a prince who was musically trained and very interested in music. Instrumental music attained greater prominence, additionally supported by the presence of virtuosos. Therefore, his creative attempt was focused on secular instrumental music. The musical standards in Cothen were higher than that of the Weimar court chapel. In Cothen, there were nightly entertainment and various festivities. Not just the six sonatas and partitas, but also the six cello suites, the French suites, the first book of the Well-Tempered Clavier, all composed for this court, which are technically demanding. For the six sonatas and partitas, including the Chaconne itself, it has been suggested that Bach wrote these pieces for a certain virtuoso, most probably for the violinist Johann Georg Pisendel, who studied with Torelli and Vivaldi. According to the first edition, Bach may have written these works for pedagogical purposes. Can you believe that? Yeah. During his early days in Cothen, Bach was not impressed by the orchestra players there. So I don't know, maybe it may be true, but I think it's just too wild and too crazy. I mean, if these six sonatas and partitas are for pedagogical purposes, yeah. The unfortunate neglect of the work during Bach's time. Although the six sonatas and partitas are among the important repertoires in the literature of violin music, however, they had been neglected in Bach's time. Today, these works are so important as indicated by the vast number of editions. Although the six sonatas and partitas were completed by 1720, the first complete edition did not appear until 1802. The earliest known public performance took place in 1840 by Ferdinand David. Later, they were popularized by Joseph Joachim. This is a really good friend of Johannes Brahms, who featured them on concerts regularly. The first partial recording was by Joachim in 1903, and the first complete recording was in 1932-34 by Yehudi Menuhin. The vast amount of editions also indicates the importance of the works. In Edlund's catalog, one finds as many as 77 editions, ranging from Simrock to Henley. It is often wondered why the works was neglected for such a long period of time. Despite much research, no conclusion has been reached due to the lack of evidence. Most probably because of the complex writing style, particularly the anti-violinist polyphonic texture, which was uncommon in violin music writing. Of course, to play polyphonic texture in piano is much easier than in violin. Yeah, I cannot even imagine that. Again, the work had been far from popular in Bach's own time, and then remained a hidden treasure during the 18th century. They represent music for music's sake, with much more profound expressions than the public needed or was accustomed to listening to. The music is difficult to understand, and it may be hard to receive into the soul. Basically, it's not just the Chaconne, it's not just the six sonatas and partitas, but actually almost all Bach's works during 1720s, 1730s, it was all under attack by many composers. Yeah, I think one of the worst one is actually Johann Adolf Scheibe, yeah, who actually really made fun of one of Bach's cantata. Forgot the number, when he basically say, how come in the music the text actually repeat all the time? I suffer, suffer, suffer a lot. I suffer a lot. You just keep repeating that, yeah, with various ways of accentuation. That's what happened in fugue, right? One subject, and the subject is being repeated or imitated or put it into sequence or put it into inflectable counterpoint and all those counterpoint technique. The appreciation of the music, therefore, requires not only a high level of technical proficiency from the performer, but also more than average receptivity from the audience. Perhaps the most monumental movement of all these six sonatas and partitas is the Chaconne, yeah, that serves as the fifth or final movement of the second partita in D minor, BWV 1004. The other four movements are Aleman, Corrente, Saraban, and Jig. Bach wrote only two pieces by the name Chaconne. The first one is actually in the concluding movement in cantata BWV 150. And the other one is the one that we discussed today. It has definitely inspired numerous violinists on the road to violin mastery. There is a consensus that this piece is a landmark in the history of the Chaconne genre. Many even considered it as the Everest of violinists. It is common for a performer to produce some unpleasant tone in chords or poor realization of polyphonic lines. As declared by John Holloway, no one ever conquers them. Yeah. Bach's remarkable skills in the Chaconne is really amazing, yeah, by writing melodic polyphony on a violin. Remember that word, on a violin. The Chaconne is the longest single movement of the unaccompanied violin works by Bach. It has 256 total bars, which has more than all of the other four movements of the partita together, which is 155 measures without repetition. It presents a variety of technical and musical challenges to the violinist. It's just fascinating how the Chaconne is developed from a mere four measure bass progression pattern. Yeah, I think in this point, Pak Johannes later will talk about the kaleidoscope, ya Pak ya, about how amazing that he can actually go into various colors. Each section demands an advanced bowing and fingering techniques unseen previously in any violin repertoire. The highly challenging technique of the Chaconne has brought a viewpoint which the art of solo violin playing of Bach's time must have been extraordinarily perfected. Uh, when I talk about music history about Beethoven and his especially his Symphony Number 9, we know in the history that Mendelssohn, Schumann, Richard Wagner basically stated in a negative way that the genre symphony has come to an end. Nobody should write any further about symphony. I think it's basically the same statement after Bach wrote this unaccompanied partita. Chaconne has most intrigued scholars, challenged performers, and inspired arrangers and transcribers. Today, it is common to see the Chaconne is performed as a stand-alone piece rather than as a whole collection of dance, the complete partita. After Bach died, the Chaconne was considered a piece which every ambitious violinist needed to learn in order to become a master. This is just a overall understanding construction of the piece. The overall scheme is 64 interconnected variations on a harmonic progression, each being 4 measures in length. Ya, jadi basically setiap variasi 4 bar. The variations usually appear in pairs. Jadi 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6. The progression is based on the descending tetrachord of the bass line D, C sharp, B, and A. An 8 major melody is referred as the Chaconne theme. Yang tan tan ti 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 ta ta. That's the Chaconne theme, uh, which recurs three times over the course of the work. Yeah, obviously the beginning, and then the middle section before it goes to the major key, and in the conclusion. So basically outlining the three large sections, minor, major, minor, of the piece. It occurs in major 1, 120, 125, and 249. And Bach Chaconne basically juxtapose the French and Italian styles. French in those chordal sections which highlight the sorbent and dotted rhythms, and Italian in the virtuoso passages. Yeah, we can see from the score, this is the original violin. So it's based on the harmony when you can see the bass line D, C sharp, B, and A, yeah, for the first four majors. And then the theme is on the upper line. And again, the variations is in pairs. The legacy of Bach Chaconne, yeah, I think most violinists that I've met basically say amazing things about this music, yeah, being so difficult but at the same time wonderful. Yeah. In a letter to Clara Schumann, Johannes Brahms wrote about the Chaconne. It is, in my opinion, one of the most wonderful and most incomprehensible pieces of music. Using the technique adapted to a small instrument, the man writes a whole world of the deepest thoughts and most powerful feelings. If I could picture myself writing or even conceiving such a piece, I am certain that the extreme excitement and emotional tension would have driven me mad. If one has no supremely great violinist at hand, the most exquisite of joys is probably simply to let the chaconne ring in one's mind. Yehudi Menuhin, remember, he was the first to record the complete partita, said that Bach's chaconne was the greatest structure for solo violin that exists. And Joshua Bell, Pak Johannes, Joshua Bell was once actually a distinguished faculty in Indiana.
Yes, he graduated from there too, from
Oh,
Indiana too.
okay, okay.
Artist diploma.
Ah, yeah. He said that the chaconne is not just one of the greatest pieces of music ever written, but one of the greatest achievements of any man in history. It's a spiritually powerful piece, emotionally powerful, and structurally perfect. Yeah, so we know how wonderful this music is. And my last point is the arrangements of chaconne. Since its first publication in 1802 by Simrock in Bonn, the chaconne is one of the most often arranged compositions in the history of music. A lot of purists argue that transcription of Bach's music are not serious artistic works, and that somehow this type of music is not as genuine as an original. According to Talia Pecker Berrio, well, she's just not an Italian musicologist, she's actually the wife of wonderful composer Luciano Berio. There exist around 30 elaborations of the chaconne during 1845 to 1937. She then adds another three in 1950, 66, and 1985. So you can see in this list the composers who made the arrangements of chaconne, not just for piano, obviously, for piano, for orchestra, for piano left hand, for organ, for orchestral accompaniment and piano accompaniment, for piano trio, for two pianos, for string quartet and string orchestra and piano, for double keyboard, for what else? Guitar. Yeah, I read the comments in YouTube Premiere, Pak Johannes, that someone already heard that in a guitar version. Yeah, so of course there are a total of 33, but there's